Hello Year 8. Today we're looking at what cities were like in the Industrial Revolution. So today you need to write down your date and title and have a go at the Do Now task, which is to look at this table and tell me what you think it suggests. So pause here, answer that question and then come back. Hopefully you have had a look at this table, and the details that you should have picked out are that the population in these cities is increasing very quickly. So these are all northern cities in England, and you can see that their population goes up relatively between 1750 and 1801, and that shouldn't be a surprise. We know that the population was increasing during this time period. However, if you look between 1801 and 1851, we have a very steep increase. If you think back to a few lessons ago when we looked at the population, this was called an exponential increase. So now I want to think about what problems that exponential increase in population may have caused. Have a look at this picture to help you, and I would like you to try and write down at least 4 adjectives to describe what problems you might have seen in an industrial city. So pause here, write down your descriptions, and then come back. So we can see here in this picture, there is quite a lot going on. The first thing that I can see are that there is overcrowding. People are crammed in together and there's lots and lots going on. Some other problems that you might have come up with are poor hygiene and sanitation. We can see there are piles of rubbish or dirt here and people don't look particularly clean. You might have talked about having sewage out in the streets. You might have talked about pollution, perhaps from the factories. You might have talked about dirty drinking water or bad housing. And these are all problems that people had to deal with in living in a city during the Industrial Revolution. Now, what's important to think about is why would people move there anyway? So there were lots of job opportunities in industrial cities, and so many people moved there that there were actually not enough houses, so they had to build new houses. Now, builders and landlords and developers could pretty much do whatever they wanted. They could use cheap materials, they could build without any regulation, so there weren't any rules about, for example, how tall a building had to be, how close together it had to be, what kind of services it needed, how quality the building materials were. And in addition to that, landlords could then charge very high rents. This would be to the point where whole families would be sharing one room. Even in those families, they might choose to take in a lodger into that one room to try and help them to cover the rents. Another issue was poor ventilation, and some of that is due to this formation of housing that many cities came up with, which is called back-to-back housing. And you can see here what this looks like in real life. So basically what would happen is they would build houses so that one backed directly onto the other. They were literally attached, and they would go round a courtyard. So this would be kind of the inside. None of them would have any gardens or anything like that. They would be really close together, really cramped in. And in some areas it was so close together, so these alleyways would be so close together that you couldn't even spread your arms out without touching a building on either side. So it's really nasty, really dark and damp conditions. What you can see here is an image from something called Charles Booth's poverty map. So Charles Booth was a reformer at the time, and he wanted to show the government what the problems were in the city. So this is from an area of London called Whitechapel. And what he did was he categorised who was living where. And you can see that along the main roads, where you would have all the fancy big Regency houses, you actually had quite middle class, well-to-do populations. When you got into the back streets behind those kind of big main roads, what they found was that we had much lower class, poorer people, and Charles Booth was focusing particularly on criminality. So he found that in these areas there was lots of vicious criminal activity going on. And actually in this area of Whitechapel was where many of the murders committed by Jack the Ripper took place. So, your task today is to consider in depth what those problems were, and we're going to use sources to help us to do that. So we're going to do the first one together, and then you're going to do the rest on your own. Your job is to identify a problem from the source, to then give a quote or a description from the source, to explain why this would be a problem for people living at the time as well. And you can see that the table helps you to do that. Now, you've got a copy of this table attached to your Satchel 1, and it includes space for all of the sources. So you've got sources A to I. What you might like to do is to do them in a different order. You don't have to do all of the sources, but you must do at least 5. So we're going to do the first one together, and then you're going to do the rest on your own. So you're going to do at least another 4 on your own. If you don't have a printer, you absolutely don't need to print this out. You can either complete it on the Word document and send that in, or you can draw this table out. Now remember, if you are drawing a table, it needs to use a full page. So you're best to turn your page landscape and use the full page for your table. Let's have a look at some of these together then. So this is my table, but we're going to annotate the source together first of all. So this is source A. I'm going to get my highlighter. If you can print your sources out and highlight them, brilliant. If you can't, then don't worry, you can just read through them. So it says there is one privy which has a cesspool in common with another privy attached to another house. The cesspool is nearly full. The woodwork of the privy can scarcely hold together and is dangerous to use. Not long ago, the landlady of some houses fell into the cesspool and was suffocated. So there's some quite unusual words in there, so we're going to unpack this a bit. So a privy is a toilet, and a cesspool is basically a big pool of excrement below it. So a big pool of poo and wee, which would sit beneath the privy. So there's no sewage here, basically. There's no pipes that carry this away. It's just a big pool underneath it. And in common with another privy attached to another house is basically saying that that's shared with another house. The cesspool is nearly full, and the woodwork of the privy can scarcely hold together. So scarcely means barely. So basically, this is about to fall down. Not long ago, the landlady of some houses fell into a cesspool and was suffocated. So she basically fell in and suffocated on a big pond full of other people's poo and wee, which sounds like an awful, awful way to go. So let's have a look and see what we can do and what we can add to our table. So the first thing I need to do is use that source to tell me According to that source, what is the problem of living in an industrial city? Well, here I can say it's probably quite dirty, or a better word to use would be unhygienic. And also I'm going to include that it was dangerous. So I can give more than one problem per source. So let's have a look back and see if I can pick out some quotes to support the fact that it was dirty and unhygienic and dangerous. So I might pick out that there was one privy which has a cesspool in common with another privy. And also I might pick out it can scarcely hold together. So I'll go here and I'll give my quote. So remember I use quotation marks. One privy with a cesspool in common with another privy and can scarcely hold together. I've spelled that wrong. Now, what we have to remember, this one privy with a cesspool in common with another privy, which was attached to another house. So that's two houses. Now, if you bear in mind that these houses could have maybe 30, 40 people living in them, because remember, we have one family per room on average, that's a huge amount of people using that toilet. And it's not being cleaned probably, it doesn't have any sewage to take it away. So that would be a problem because it would mean that many people were using one toilet with no sewage system. So we can assume that disease would spread quickly. Okay. I've also said it's dangerous, so I need to explain why that would be a problem. So lack of building regulations meant people okay. So I've given my problem based on what I've seen in the source. I've backed that up with some quotes and I've explained why that would be a problem. Now remember, if you're drawing this table out, you need to take it from the lowest point. So if I'd drawn this table out in my book, I would then take it from the lowest point and draw my line across the whole thing there, obviously using a ruler, not like I've done here. So I would draw across the whole thing from the lowest point and then move on to source B or whichever source I do next. I wouldn't line off up here, then here, then here, because that can lead to it getting confusing. Okay, so your job now is to go through your remaining sources and to do the same thing for those. Now, if you finish and you have a bit more time, then you can think about what sources are similar and what sources are different. So, for example, for source A, are there any other sources where it demonstrates that the problem of living in the city is that it's dirty or unhygienic? If you have any questions, make sure that you ask your teacher, and if you need any help, get in touch. You should then submit your work via Satchel 1. Good luck!